On his very first day of school, the boy was branded a delinquent by the entire class just for having a face like a demon. Even the teacher's voice trembled while introducing his name. His classmates were so petrified that they barely dared to breathe. To show everyone that he wasn't actually scary, Kitano tried to flash a kind smile, but it backfired spectacularly. Soon word of his reputation spread across the entire campus. As the school's undisputed top dog, Kuroda decided to teach this freshman, who had the first years living in terror, a lesson. When lunch break arrived, while other students were either chowing down or enjoying the outdoors, Kitano's classroom was deathly silent. It wasn't until they saw him finally leave the room that everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. Little did they know a dejected Kitano heard everything from just behind the door. Just as he was feeling down, Kuroda and his lackeys suddenly showed up, asking if he knew where the new transfer student was. Kitano turned around to answer, but his intense gaze had an unintended effect. Kuroda's yaw nearly hit the floor in pure shock. The overwhelming aura was so suffocating that Kuroda could barely even manage to walk. After stammering that he'd found the wrong classroom, Kuroda scrambled away without looking back. Back at their secret base, the two lackeys were baffled by their boss's behavior, but Kuroda scolded them for being too naive. Judging from his daily fighting experience, he was sure Kitano was no ordinary thug. He likely even had blood on his hands. Therefore, he strictly warned the two, never provoke Kitano. But if he dares to come looking for us, I'll be the first one to step up and face him. However, no sooner had he said it than Kuroda began to regret his words. As it happened, Kitano was also nearby at that moment. He was quietly picking up trash scattered across the campus. Zane, a tree trunk toppled by the typhoon, right in front of him. Kitano intended to move it, however, the way he hoisted the trunk was witnessed by the delinquent trio. At that exact moment, Kuroda panicked instantly to him. This posture didn't look like a challenge to a fight. It looked like he was there to take his life. In reality, Kitano just wanted to flee as he was terrified of these delinquents himself. But the trunk was so heavy that he lost his footing. He went hurtling uncontrollably straight toward Kuroda. After a loud crash, Kitano was certain he was about to be pummeled. To his surprise, Kuroda burst into tears and began begging for mercy. Just like that, Kitano inexplicably became the top boss of Baikon High School. Not only did his classmates' fear of him intensify, but even the teachers didn't dare look him in the eye, terrified of displeasing him. In reality, Kitano was simply focusing intently on the lesson. Every time the bell rang, Kitano would voluntarily leave the classroom. He didn't want his presence to disrupt his classmates' break time. While he was out, a blonde delinquent hopped over the school fence. Not long ago, he had been suspended for 2 weeks for injuring a teacher. Returning today, he immediately beat up Kuroda and his two lackeys again. He thought this would secure his spot as the top dog. But Kuroda told him that the throne had already been taken by a transfer student named Kitano, who had suppressed all the school's gangs in just a single day. Takazaki was about to ask which class the newcomer was in, but he found that Kuroda had already passed out. With no other choice, he headed back to the classroom first. Takazaki was quite pleased to see the terrified looks on his classmates' faces. Little did he know they only looked that way because they thought Kitano had returned. After finding an empty seat and sitting down, Takazaki began to fantasize about how cool he must look. Just then, a girl stood up to warn him that he shouldn't sit in that spot. However, before she could even finish her sentence, Kitano returned from the restroom and noticed the blonde guy was in the wrong seat. He realized the mistake but felt too awkward to just tell him to move. Sensing someone approaching, Takazaki slowly turned his head. But one look was all it took. He thought he'd come face to face with a demon. He quickly tried to act casual and hurried out of the classroom, forgetting even his backpack in his haste. This left Kitano quite confused. Was it because of his scary face again? With that thought, he immediately chased after him to apologize. But the student's brain cannoned that Kitano was finally going on the attack. Outside the school, Takazaki cursed himself for wimping out like that. That terrifying, vicious gaze was burned into his mind. But before he could even catch his breath, Kitano had already tracked him down. His instincts screamed that if he didn't fight back, he was a dead man. He pulled out a knife, prepared for a desperate fight to the death. In Kitano's eyes, however, it looked like Takazaki was trying to take his own life, so rushed forward without hesitation, while Takazaki saw him as a menacing threat. In a panic, Takazaki swung the knife in his hand. Kitano's face was cut, but instead of being angry or afraid, his only thought was how to stop Takazaki from hurting himself. Seizing the moment, Takazaki froze Kitano, pinned the knife against a tree, then grabbed Takazaki's hand to check for injuries. Luckily, it was just a minor scratch. In a chair. Tyson is in a chair. After this incident, Takazaki's admiration for Kitano knew no bounds. Two of them became the best of friends. Soon, the legend of Kitano's invincibility spread to the neighboring school, while the former boss's crushing defeat became a total laughingstock. But Kuroda had no choice but to swallow his pride and endure the mockery, as the delinquent gang from Hakuen High was a force he dared not provoke. Just then, he noticed a familiar figure appearing in the distance. Once he realized it was boss Kitano, Kuroda instantly stood tall with confidence, and even went so far as to shout provocations at the rivals. However, when he turned around, he found that the boss had suddenly vanished. It turned out Kitano had just accidentally picked up a lost wallet, intended to use the info inside to track down the owner, and just as Kuroda and his gang were about to get thrashed, the bus pulled up, and seeing this, Kitano rushed over to catch it. After scaring off the Hakun High crew, Kuroda showered Kitano with praise, but Kitano simply asked if he knew a guy named Takeshi Iijima. Hearing this, Kuroda was completely stunned, because Iijima was the top boss of Hakun High since Kitano didn't mention the wallet. Kuroda's imagination ran wild, concluding that he was planning to take down the rival boss head on. Soon after Iijima heard about the incident at the bus stop, after disciplining his 3 pathetic underlings, he prepared to head to Baikon High to reclaim his school's honor, and so the two bosses headed off to each other's schools. When Kitano arrived at Hakun High, the first person he encountered was the second-in-command Hayami. Zane, the rival school uniform Hayami, was about to demand his business, only to be terrified by the monstrous expression on Kitano's face. Realizing this was the boss from next door targeting Iijima, Hayami immediately took a defensive stance, observing while making a tactical retreat. However, this bizarre way of walking made Kitano unable to stifle a laugh. Saying that Kitano hadn't even taken a fighting stance, Sashui lunged forward with a heavy punch, but to his horror, Kitano's expression became even more terrifying after taking the hit.
Is it impossible I actually managed to land a hit?
Kitano, believing he was the one at fault, decided to let the other guy keep hitting him until his anger was spent. Sashui, however, forgot that the stairs were right behind him, and a second later, he accidentally tumbled all the way down. Saying this, Kitano completely lost his composure out of worry. Meanwhile, over at Baikon High School, Iijima not only easily crushed the Kuroda trio, but even the formidable Takasaki couldn't last more than 2.5 minutes against him. Just as he was demanding to know Kitano's whereabouts, a lackey rushed in with news that their home base had been raided, and their second-in-command, Soshui, had already been defeated. His face darkening at the news, Iijima told Kuroda to give Kitano a message. Show up at the small park tomorrow morning for a final showdown. Bring as many people as you want. If you don't show, you'll regret the consequences. The next day, when Kuroda informed Kitano of the challenge, Kitano was overjoyed, thinking he could finally return the wallet to its owner. Watching Kitano walk away, Kuroda finally realized the noble intentions behind his boss's actions. He believed the boss was willing to walk into a hopeless battle just to ensure their safety. Before long, Takasaki also rushed to the scene. No matter the outcome of the duel, he was determined to follow his boss to the end. By now, a massive crowd from Baiyun High had already gathered in the park. With only 5 people on Kitano's side, they were hopelessly outnumbered. But the moment they saw Kitano's face, most of the gang began to panic. Even Iijima couldn't help but knit his brows in apprehension. Kitano, on the other hand, felt they were overreacting over a mere lost wallet. He couldn't believe so many people had come out in the rain for such a small thing. Takeyu was the first to move, wanting Kitano to focus solely on Iijima. With that, he charged into the Shiran High gang all by himself. This bold move caught the opponents completely off guard. They never expected a group of only 5 to strike first. Saying this, Kuroda didn't hesitate any longer. He charged in with his crew, and the two sides immediately fell into a massive brawl. Watching this unfold, Kitano was left utterly dazed. Just as he was about to stop the fighting, a towering figure suddenly blocked his path. After realizing it was Iijima, Kitano started fumbling for the wallet but couldn't find it anywhere. He went to stand up and explain, but was met with a heavy punch to the face. Kuroda's trio was outnumbered, but their sheer toughness kept them standing. Meanwhile, Takeju squared off against the second-in-command Soshui. Saying he was outmatched in hand-to-hand combat, Soshui played dirty. He whipped out a knife and lunged straight at Takeju. Saying the blade, Takeju prepared to give him a taste of his own medicine. But Kitano wasn't so lucky by now. He'd been beaten black and blue by Iijima, yet he still refused to strike back. He felt that since he was careless and forgot the wallet, he deserved the punishment. But then he saw blood dripping from Takeyu's hand. Staking it for another suicide attempt, Kitano was suddenly surged with adrenaline. He stood up, trembling with intense agitation. The scar on his face twitching, all he wanted was to save Takeju. However, Iijima mistook his movement for an attempt to flee. He landed another heavy blow squarely on Kitano's forehead. But even after such a massive blow, Kitano's only thought was still to stop Takasaki. It was this single-minded determination that filled his hands with explosive power. As a result, Erdao was sent flying several meters back by the cloud pushing palm. This sight instantly stunned everyone on the scene. Soshui rushed over to check on him, only to find that Erdao had already passed out. This signaled the total defeat of Baiyun High, and it was only then that Kitano realized the wallet had been in his pocket all along. He would properly express his gratitude, but in Sushui's ears these words sounded like a threat to settle the score in person next time.
No matter how it started, the legend has only just begun. As the story unfolds, the misunderstanding reaches a whole new level. Sigh.